Please make sure that the questions there is a chat window, you can put it in the chat window. There is a question and answer window, that will be where ideally you should be putting in the questions. And as we go through the presentation, a couple of housekeepings. You're all by default muted, and you will be there will be some phases in the presentation. We will take a pause and at a logical end and stop for some questions and answer the questions on the question answer window. So I would request you to put it on the question answer window, and we will take as many questions as possible. And towards the end of the session, also we will keep some time for question answer. Thank you, Rajesh. Completely over to you. It's your show now.
Thank you so much, Vaidhi, and thank you, esteemed Panu. It's good to be here today, and I'm actually happy to be here to actually talk to you about 5G itself. What I'm going to be doing initially is I'm going to be talking about 5G as a technology. I did see a question a little while back about what is the difference between 3G/4G/5G. I will cover the architecture of 5G, and I shall talk about what are the use cases, and I shall talk about the threat landscape and how do you address some of them. Right. As Vaidhi mentioned, 5G has been a buzzword for a while, and not too many people have actually adopted it as yet. And there are some countries who are leading in that effort, but not everybody has been able to do that as yet. In India, trials have, I know that Airtel actually did do a working demonstration using something called Option 3, and I'll explain what that is in a bit. I do know that the spectrum auctions basically should come up soon. I know that there have been applications that are going on doing the trials soon. So I think we should actually get this thing moving quite soon. Getting straight into it, as I mentioned, getting straight into it, this is basically the agenda. I'll talk about 4G and 5G architectures. I will touch a little bit about the history of 2G to 5G. Right. I'll talk about the use cases specifically as defined by the 3GPP, and I'll talk about the threat surface. I may digress a little bit. I may not necessarily follow the slide because I may need to sort of talk about things that are beyond it. But rest assured that the reason I'm doing that is basically to make sure that you have the right background of it. All right. Cool. So getting straight into this, right? We have to talk about 5G security and the threats that are relevant to 5G. Right. And a lot of the threats that were actually relevant to 5G are kind of what were available or basically were available with the earlier technologies as well. There are mechanisms basically where 5G has come in and has been able to mitigate some of them or basically circumvent some of them. But there definitely are issues beyond that as well. So as you see, there are a lot of articles that have come out which talk about 5G attacks, or basically telephony attacks or mobility attacks. And I think it will actually just grow as long as things get deployed as the basic the deployment surface area increases, right? So couple of things that are actually added here, something called advanced key algorithm or basically agreement mechanism, right? That was something that was supposed to protect something called the MC, and I'll talk about MC in a while. So those things actually have been kind of broken to a certain extent. Reason for that is because some of the functions that we talked about could actually be defined as optional, right? So just to give you a little idea, how fast the security arena has been changing and how fast the researchers are actually able to look at vulnerabilities in systems, right? So when GSM came in, the first official attack or the first official exploit that was actually talked about was about 18 years from the first attacks, right? 8 years from the standards to the first attacks for 4G, and 5G is not even out yet, and vulnerabilities have already been identified. So that's basically where we are. In case somebody needs more detail about the specific timeline, reach out to me. I could probably talk about that a little while later. All right. So just to give you a brief history of the Gs, as somebody asked, what is the main difference between 3G/4G/5G? Right. So if you see, 2G was dominantly voice oriented, right? It was basically about voice communication, right? 3G obviously got in a certain amount of broadband functions connectivity. Speeds obviously, increased. And then 4G came in. And then the main advent of 4G basically was the fact that, came into something called the EPC, which is the enhanced or the evolved packet core. And what they talked about basically is virtualization in the infrastructure. 5G kind of took that a little bit ahead, or quite a bit ahead, and there's a lot of virtual functions that come in, right? If you see 5G itself has been dominantly, I mean, if you see 5G, the working bodies have talked about use cases specifically. So 5G is one of the technologies which is very, very dominantly based on use cases rather than just technology, right? Speeds basically, it says 2 Gbps here, but it can actually go up to 20 Gbps depending upon the mechanism that's been given out, right? So again, as I said, it's all about really, really fast speeds, about low latency, about being able to connect as much as possible. So high density is something that's extremely important, and availability, obviously, because if you see 5G as a technology, I actually read somewhere that 5G is something that will actually uh, improve or basically affect economies of countries, right? Because the amount of connectivity that comes in will basically bring out new use cases, bring out new capabilities and abilities for people to interact better, to work better, right? So I talked about the use cases that were relevant for 5G, and I'll probably spend a little bit of time here, right? So there are three main use cases that the bodies talked about. Something called enhanced mobile broadband, and this basically means, well, obviously very, very fast connectivity, and fast connectivity lends itself to a lot of functions, things like well, high-speed gaming, things like holographic communication, things like high-speed video conferencing, things like 8K video, right? That's one part of it. The other part is the ultra reliable and low latency communication. And this is extremely important because this is basically what will actually be able to sort of provide capabilities for the OT part that we talked about. And the OT is not only the Internet of Things, it's also the operational technology of things. It's about having, let's say, a car, right? You've got the self-driving or autonomous cars. Now, autonomous cars, when they're driving on the road, they need to be able to communicate with other functions on the road, right? For example, there's something called V2X, which is vehicle to anything communication, or vehicle to anything, which could be cars to signals, or cars to other cars, or cars to, well, pretty much anything, right? Imagine having the capability to have the car understand that there is actually a red signal and stop on its own. Now, imagine if the latency was not low, and imagine if it was not reliable. Imagine that if a car which was supposed to stop at a red signal did not because of buffering issues, right? We don't really want those kind of things. And last but not least is the massive machine to machine type communication. And this is something that is characterized by high density. It's not something that is extremely high bandwidth, but it is extremely high density. So we're talking about something like, about a million devices per kilometer kind of function, right? So these are the use cases that 5G is envisioned to bring, and logically speaking, it will actually be much more than this as well, right? Because think about things like remote surgery. In this day and age of lockdowns and being shut down at home, right? A lot of things that we actually have to do need to actually be able to done remotely. So one thing that I do want to talk about basically is spectrum, and the reason I talk about spectrum is because that actually kind of gives you a direction on why the proliferation of 5G is going to be very different from what 4G is all about, right? So obviously the spectrum is all about the wavelength, right? And there is something called millimeter wave when it actually comes to 5G. And millimeter wave basically is something that's, well, obviously very, very low wavelength functions, which basically means that it'll be able to, it'll be actually able to provide very, very high bandwidth. But again, when you talk about higher spectrums or basically higher frequencies, what actually happens is the reach reduces, right? The distance or the range reduces. So that is one particular aspect we'll probably have to look at. And I'll talk about that when I'm talking about, protecting the edge or protecting the perimeter. So moving up ahead, right? What I wanted to talk about also is deployment options. So there are multiple deployment options, and I will actually concentrate on three specific options up ahead. But there are, as I said, multiple options. One could be the standalone LTE under EPC, which is essentially the 4G network. Then you've got something called the standalone NR, okay, which is basically the pure 5G function, right? NR basically is new radio. Standalone obviously means standalone. It means that it doesn't really have any relation to the older technologies. Now, this is something that a lot of service providers are aspiring to get to, but they're not really there. As Mr. Vaidi mentioned, not too many countries are actually up there, and a lot of people who actually are deploying 5G are actually deploying more of the option three part, and I'll explain to you about that when I get up ahead. The other options obviously are, a 5G core with an LTE front end. It could actually be an EPC core with a NR front end, right? But again, dominantly, when we're talking about people getting into 5G, it is dominantly EPC, which is the 4G core, with LTE, which is again the 4G antenna, and the NR antenna, which is the new radios, right? Now, we also have to talk about the technologies that actually enable 5G, right? Because, and this is something that will kind of explain to you what is the main differences between the earlier 4G versus 5G. Now, one thing that is very, very prevalent in 5G and something that will actually give us much more control is something called CUPS, which is basically control and user plane separation. The benefit of this basically obviously is that you can actually have very specific slices which are defined for controlled traffic versus user traffic. So the data plane necessarily will probably not actually be affecting the user plane itself, or the user plane slash the data plane will not actually be affecting the signal traffic itself. The separation will actually help scaling much better. It will actually be able to provide capabilities to provide much better quality of experience depending on what kind of functions that you require, right? The next part is the Cloud RAN. And as Mr. Vaidi mentioned a little while back, something called O-RAN. And I have something up ahead. I'll talk about O-RAN in a bit, right? Which basically means that instead of the traditional base station slash backhaul slash the data center, or basically the packet core, it's been split up into multiple functions. I'll talk about the functions up ahead. And the reason it's extremely important is because some of these functions, as they are split up, they actually give you more capabilities to scale, to provide higher density, to provide capabilities to define security elements or security controls in parts of the network, or points of the network, right? The other part that I need to talk about is something called MEC. So depending upon when you read, what kind of publication you read, MEC is actually called two different things in some places. One, it's called mobile edge computing, which is the older definition, and something called multi-access edge computing. And think about it as a parallel to fog computing, where you actually have distributed computing. And the reason for this is that when you're trying to provide low latency, high bandwidth kind of functions, you want to actually make sure that the compute itself is as close to the user as possible, right? The reason it is not mobile edge computing anymore is because it doesn't, when you talk about 5G, it doesn't actually have to be only mobile phones, right? It could actually be pretty much anything. In fact, 5G doesn't necessarily even dictate that you need to have a SIM card or an eSIM card. You could actually be having Wi-Fi connectivity to 5G, right? So that's where it is. And last but not least is network slicing. And network slicing is something that is extremely logical. We've been doing these kind of things on network segmentation, right? On standard networks or enterprise networks for a while. Now, and again, things like VPNs or things like MPLS VPNs. What network slicing does basically, it actually allows you the capability to break up your network into, or basically the services that you actually offer, into multiple slices. Each slice can actually be completely independent of each other, and each slice can be defined, can actually be provided specific resources and specific user experience requirements or quality of experience requirements, right? Now, the reason this is actually, the way this is facilitated also basically is the fact that a lot of 5G networks, slash even the older, some of the 4G, is based on virtualization. Now, there was actually an excellent session done last time on container security, and I would actually urge you to have a look at that, or go through that if you haven't. So that is something that kind of lends itself very well to the scale and the functionality of 5G. So I talked about 5G network slicing, and as I said, it actually gets implemented by multiple mechanisms. The standard doesn't specifically talk about how do you implement it, but basically the standard talks, or the recommendation talks about the fact that you should be doing this to protect yourself from multiple kinds of issues, and also make sure that you define the right COE, QoE. right? I talked about multi-access edge computing, and multi-access edge computing is, as I told you, being able to provide computing capabilities closer to the user. It also actually provides another function. It at times, in certain cases, offloads the compute from the UE, which is the user equipment, which could be the phone or could actually be the any end device that's connecting. Could be an OT device, which probably doesn't have a lot of compute capabilities, and it actually puts it closer to the user, so that it can actually be the capability or the functionality is as rapid as possible. So getting back into the architecture itself, and this is something that will explain the structure. So towards the left, you actually have the phones. This is the 4G architecture, right? And the reason I have this is so I can actually give you the differences between the two. Towards the left, you actually have the mobile phones, or the UE that is called. That's towards the absolute left. Then you've got the RAN section, which is the the radio network, right? And the radio network actually consists of something called ENBs, or eNode Bs. eNode Bs are basically the base stations that are used in, well, they're basically the equivalent of base stations that were used in 3G/2G, right? And they're basically a monolithic function. So this is not split, it's a simple function. And then you actually have a backhaul. The backhaul goes and connects to the packet core, and obviously you've got a transport in between. The transport could actually be anything. It could actually be a public transport, or it could be something that's privately, held by the service provider. And then you've got obviously the internet connectivity. The packet core has multiple functions or multiple components. I'm not going to go into that right now, but the main reason I have this is so that I can actually give you the differences between the two. Now, when we talk about 5G, right? 5G, if you see on the left, the devices have changed. So it's not only mobile phones anymore. It's basically connected cars, it's connected homes, it's, well, the watch out here, it's tablets, it's pretty much anything. It could actually be medical equipment. And then you've got something called the G Node B. And the G Node B basically is the NR that I talked about a little while back, the new radios as it's specified. Then you got something called a mid-haul and a backhaul, if you see this, instead of just a backhaul, right? And I'll explain that as I come up ahead, right? And then you got the packet core up ahead. If you see at the mid-haul or between the mid-haul, there is something called the MEC, and that's basically the distributed data center or distributed computing that is actually going to be used for providing services to the endpoints. Okay. Now, Vaibhi talked about ORAN, right, which is the Open RAN function. And what Open RAN is all about is basically about breaking up the eNode B that we talked about into three functions. That's, you've got something called the radio unit, right? Then you've got something called the distributed unit and something called the centralized unit. The radio unit, as I mentioned, basically was something that provides the interface to the radio connectivity. So that's basically where your phones connect, right? The distributed unit does things like, it's basically a compute function that does things like resource management for a radio perspective, and the connectivity functions. Some of it basically, as I said, these three functions were kind of combined into the base stations earlier. In this case, this particular function is broken into three places, and the DU typically is closer to the cell site, and then you actually have the CU, which typically sits slightly in between, right? So instead of actually having a RAN / backhaul / core, you have something called the radio unit, and you've got the front haul. The RU / DU can actually, at times, could actually be in the same place, or they could actually be slightly further ahead. The CU typically is kept in a different place, and CU typically controls a lot of DUs, right? And a lot of coordination functions and a lot of aggregation functions are done by the CUs. So typically you'll be having a really large number of RUs, which go and connect to DUs, which basically on the back end go and connect to the CUs, which kind of aggregate functions, right? Which kind of makes the CU an excellent place for defining certain policies, as I'll talk about up ahead, right? And again, you actually move ahead to the backhaul, and you got the different interfaces, right? So one other thing that I want to talk about when I'm talking about 5G versus 4G or 3G is when you talk about the internet connectivity, right? You actually, when you had in the earlier versions, you only had something called a GI / an SGI, where you would actually be connecting out to the internet, and usually this would actually be off the core. Right now, if you're talking about 5G, you may actually even have connectivity coming to the internet via the edge, right, or via the MEC. That's something called a DIA, or a direct internet access. So that kind of increases the surface area quite a bit. The other thing that's extremely important is a lot of these things are actually done in containers or in virtual functions. These could actually be either VNFs or CNFs. Discussion of VNF slash, I'll talk about virtualization a little bit up ahead, but discussion about VNF slash CNF and the manner function is something that is a different topic altogether. I'll give you, what I'll talk about is some of the threads that are relevant to it, right? So I did mention about the options or the deployment options. So as I said, when you talk about a 4G core with an eNodeB, that's a 4G LTE. If you have a 5G core with a 5G radio, that's basically the 5G standalone, right? SA. And you've got something called the 5G NSA or the non-standalone, which is basically the option 3 that I showed a little while back, right? If you see, this actually has a 4G core, and it's got an eNodeB, which is basically the antenna for LTE or 4G, and you've got the GNodeB, which is actually the antenna or basically the antenna structure for 5G. Typically, this is a migration path, right? And because a lot of service providers already have a 4G core running, and they want to actually get into the 5G bandwagon as soon as possible. So putting in a 5G antenna provides you the capability to give faster connectivity to the endpoints, right? There are obviously certain connotations out there. If you see this, you'll probably think that when a 5G core, 5G UE or a end equipment connects to option 3, it goes and connects to the GNodeB and connects to the 4G core. In reality, it's slightly different. In reality, what actually happens is the 5G end device basically goes and talks to the eNodeB. There are certain exchanges that are done, and those exchanges are based on the LTE standard, the old standards anyway. And then what it does basically, it actually flips a particular bit, right? Which basically tells the 4G core that this particular endpoint is able to actually connect to 5G. And it basically goes and creates a different connection to 5G while maintaining a connection with the original LTE as well, right? And this is extremely important because when I'll talk about the security enhancements on 5G as per the specifications, and I'll talk about the connotations of having a non-SA or an NSA function. So getting straight into it, we'll just get into the threat surface, right? And this is what I wanted to talk about, right? I wanted to talk about the enhancements that are intrinsic to 5GPP. I do actually have a link down here, so in case somebody wants to have a look at that, to get into more detail. I'll talk about the 4 main parts here. I'll talk about the air interface security, right? And air interface security is something that's extremely important because one of the most common mechanisms to attack a mobile network basically is something called MC catching, right? And MC basically, think about MC as the identifier for the SIM in your phone, right? So you might have heard about something called IMEI, you might have heard about something called MC. There is something called TIMC, which I'll talk about up ahead as well, right? So the air interface security is there is a definition on how do you actually encrypt that, right? But if you remember the last slide that I spoke, right, I did mention that when you're talking about a NSA kind of function, then the UE actually speaks to the LTE antenna first, and then it speaks to the 5G. So some of the functions that are some of the protection mechanisms that are actually on 5G may not necessarily be very, very effective when you're talking about a mixed mode or a non-standalone function, right? I'll talk about these things up ahead. The next part that I want to talk about basically is subscriber security, right? And when I'm talking about subscriber security, I'm talking about the fact I did mention, the MC catching part. So what happens basically is when a device connects to the network, pretty much most of the communication that actually happens initially is clear text, right? And there is till the time there is actually on the air, there's a lot of things that can be done here. There could be mechanisms where people are sniffing the air to actually look at the MC. And the thing about the IMSI is if somebody knows your IMSI, he can do things like spoof your phone. He could do things like find out your location, right? And when I do get to the roaming part, I'll talk about that. You could do things like, for example, if you know, there was a an article which talked about the fact that SIM OTPs may not exactly be very, very secure, and that's because of the fact that it is possible for somebody to actually sniff the air and uh, masquerade as your endpoint and probably get SMSs. Though that particular messaging has actually been diluted now, but that was actually a little while back. And I'll talk about SUPI and SUKI a little later. But just to sort of give you a brief idea, what SUPI basically is something called subscriber unique private identifier, which is basically a private identifier for the SIM itself, right, for the end user. And you got something called SUKI, and SUKI basically is SUKI or SUSI, right? And that's basically the SUPI which is being encrypted by the public key of the provider, right? This is actually an optional function, and I'll talk about that again up ahead. As I said, functions have been broken down into multiple functions. Okay, so there are more granular functions, right? And there is something called SEPP. So if you're actually moving, let's say, from one location to another, if you're roaming, typically what happens is you've got something called the home network and the network, which is the roaming network, right? You will go and connect to the roaming network. And essentially what you'll do is you'll actually tunnel back to your home network, and that's basically where all the data exit functions actually happen, right? The mechanism that used to be used earlier when you talk about roaming was something called SS7, right? In 4G, you have something called GTP/diameter, and diameter is actually used for a lot of authentication functions in LTE or in 4G anyway, right? In 5G, you got something called SEPP, and I'll talk about SEPP when I come to the part which talks about roaming protection. Okay, so as Vaidi mentioned, now since the fact ultimately is that there is a lot of IoT, there is a lot of M2M. The joke basically was where is the security in IoT, right? So that's basically the security is exactly where the S is there in IoT, which is basically it doesn't exist, right? It really depends upon the kind of device that's actually being used. Some providers or some manufacturers are very, very specific about security. They have different mechanisms, different authentication mechanisms, but a lot of them don't, right? The other part obviously is that IoT devices can actually be used to launch attacks as well, launch attacks to the network itself or beyond itself. This talks about V2X use cases. Now imagine basically if a car is, or if a signal, a traffic signal is hijacked, right? So that's one particular issue that we have to think about, right? The other part, as I talked about, is virtualization. Pretty much everything is getting virtualized internally, right? The packet core is virtual, the CU is virtual, the DU is virtual. A lot of the functions that are in the MEC are virtual, right? In certain cases, I mean, there are deployment models for 5G which could actually be based on cloud. So what would happen basically is in that case, the complete packet core or those kind of functions could be cloud hosted, and you'd probably be just having the mobile provider could actually just have the radio unit or the G Node B, which is basically theirs, and connecting back out to the cloud. Now, this obviously adds a different level of complexity altogether, right? I'll talk about certain kinds of side channel attacks when I come to the virtualization part of the presentation, right? As I mentioned, there is extremely distributed architecture, right? There are different mechanisms to connect to the endpoints as well, right? And again, the requirement for ultra low latency communication, which basically means that security is extremely or even more important now, right? The other part, which is something that's extremely important, and this is something that's kind of an issue with pretty much every technology when you talk about, legacy support. When you actually have new capabilities on a new technologies, those particular capabilities, security capabilities, might be relevant only for that particular function. When you're talking about being able to support legacy technology like 5G, like 4G, and backward compatibility, you do have to do a compromise, right? And the only way to sort of control those or basically, mitigate those particular compromises is to make sure that you have the right paradigms of security defined when you are designing your infrastructure. So getting into the actual threat surface, I did talk about multiple functions, right? I talked about the RAN part, I talked about the core, and talked about the path itself, right? There are
Rajesh,
multiple.
Rajesh
Yes,
Vaidya here.
yes, of course, Vaidhi.
Just a couple of questions are there, Rajesh. There are 2, 3 questions. If we can just take a pause and take those questions before we come to the threat surface.
Of course.
Okay, I will read out the questions for you, Rajesh. One is a
Mhm.
general questions. One is a general question from Shikant Sheshadri. How will privacy regulations, will privacy regulation reduce the speed of 5G implementation? Will it slow down? It's more of a generic question, but what are your thoughts on that?
So, in fact, I'll probably cover some of those up ahead. But
Okay.
typically, what will actually happen, I'll actually just mention this, right? So, obviously, when you're talking about the initial exchange part of things, if things are implemented correctly, should not really slow down the infrastructure, because the encryption itself is something that could be inbuilt into 5G itself. The connectivity on the background, when you're talking about, let's say, from the rack to the packet core, there are mechanisms, or there are parts in the standard which actually use encryption capabilities to do that as well. And typically, what will actually happen is those should not, in theory, slow down things as long as the capacity is built, right? For example, I just talk about the fact that you use something called sec gateways or security gateways. And security gateways are basically, in layman's terms, they're basically IPsec concentrators or VPN concentrators. Now, obviously, when you talk about VPN concentration functions, they actually do add a certain amount of latency, but a lot of the VPN functionality is done in hardware. As long as the capacity is right, and as long as you don't have multiple levels of encryption, you may not necessarily have too much of a delay or a latency. And the other thing that I mentioned basically is a lot of these services are actually being pulled towards the edge, right? So you don't necessarily have to go right towards the edge itself. The third part, which is the most important part, is the separation between the user plane and the data plane. Sorry, the signaling plane or the control plane and the data plane or the user plane, right? Which basically allows the different parts. So the part which needs to be extremely protected, the signaling part, should logically be encrypted. The user part could actually be the prerogative of the user itself, depending upon what particular application. And that's where enterprise security functions could actually also come to the picture, right? If you're talking about people connecting to public areas, you may actually have, I mean, again, you got users versus enterprises. Enterprises might want to actually employ additional capabilities or additional technologies like SASE, like VPNs, or basically ZTNA kind of functions, basically where the user itself is kind of opaque to the whole infrastructure. One part that I do want to talk about here basically is when you're talking about a mobility infrastructure, there is something called LI, which is lawful interception, right? So that is something that typically will also come into the picture, usually at the packet core level. And I think that may not necessarily be relevant to this particular question, but I thought I'll mention it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. So Rajesh, what we understand is the privacy regulations, while they are mandatory, will not slow down 5G implementations per se or communication, because it depends on the capability and the encryption levels that you are using primarily on the edge. Because it will also, let me just ask an extension of that question, which has come from me, is then the edge, the way the edge is, kind of structured, manufactured, makes a big difference, right? So the chips in the edge, the capability of the edge, and how will the edge manufacturers synchronize with the backhaul network? Because say, for example, I'm taking some names here, right? Samsung produces, or Apple produce equipment which can actually work at 5G speed, right? But they don't produce that network equipment. Network equipments are done by, say, the Ericssons and Nokias of the world, right? Or Verizon of the world. So how do they sync, Rajesh? Just a general question, and then we will continue with the presentation.
Yes, so the communication mechanisms itself, the handshake mechanism, those are standardized, right? So so that's basically where the beauty of abstraction comes in, right? So you've got the stack which actually communicates with the rack, which is the radio access unit, right? That's basically where what Samsung needs to understand, or let's say Ericsson needs to understand, and that needs to be compatible with again, on the other side also there is Samsung, by the way, on the 5G network part, right? So that particular part has to be compatible. So as I said, you've got the standards, the 4G handshake mechanisms, you've got the 5G handshake mechanism. As long as those things are actually correct, I don't think that should not be an issue. I do need to expand on the last question because I did not hear implementation the last time. I just heard about performance. So implementation from a regulations perspective, I really can't necessarily comment on whether that will slow down, but it would probably be also about when the spectrum is actually provided, which spectrum is actually allowed, right? Because depending upon which particular spectrum is which particular frequencies are actually allowed, depending upon that, things could actually be different. Does that
Great,
kind of
Rajesh.
answer the question?
Yes, it does, Rajesh. Thank you very much. Just thought, it's a logical place to stop the questions. Please go ahead. There are many more questions which are coming up, Rajesh. We will reserve it for the right time. Go ahead, please.
So you said, is there any other question that I can answer, or should I just continue with this now?
You can continue, sir, after that. Thank
Perfect. All righty. So as I mentioned, you've got different functions in your infrastructure. You've got the RAN, which is the radio network. You've got the distributed DC or the MEC that we talked about, and you've got the backend, which is the packet core. Now, if you see a lot of these, if you see those particular colors, they're basically slices where you actually provide separation, right? At the endpoint level or the UE level, there's obviously the standard functions that actually happen there. You've got the standard malware. You've got things like firmware hacks or could be typically anything. It could actually be firmware issue, could be things like device tampering. TFTP is actually quite important here because if you see a lot of the OT equipment could actually be provided configurations and those kind of things via TFTP or via FTP mechanisms, right? So man in the middle attacks could actually be very relevant out here. Now, on the air interface, obviously, you've got the standard MITM attacks, and these could be things like trying to create a base station of your own, right? Trying to increase the power so that I connect to you instead of the actual base station of the service provider, right? It could be obviously frequency jamming, and frequency jamming is again a different thing altogether, different topic altogether. Towards the right, you obviously have things like not actually towards the right, towards the middle, you obviously have the rogue nodes part, which I talked about. The MEC server vulnerability is something that is a little open because the MEC could actually be many functions. It could actually be any application. So there, basically, you have to think about two things. Most of the time, these particular applications will be based on containers. It'll actually be having usually it will be a service-based function. So you'll probably have multiple services that are interacting with each other. A lot of them might actually be immutable in function, right? So we have to make sure that the application itself is secure. We have the right controls from an authentication/authorization perspective that is actually there. We have to make sure that the library or the images that are actually pulled down, right, catalog as you call it, right, is actually correct and it is verified, right? And then moving towards the right, you've got DDoS, which is always something that's extremely common. Now, if you remember the slide that I talked about, where we talked about the attacks that are prevalent, most of them were DDoSes. And DDoS could be actually in two ways, right? You could be having DDoSes inbound, where the GI/SGI part is actually getting, which is the connectivity towards the internet, is actually getting overwhelmed. Or it could actually be the devices that are connected into the infrastructure that are actually creating a DDoS internally, or it could actually be a DDoS which is going outside. You could be having endpoints that are actually connecting to the RAN network and doing fuzzing, basically, right? Earlier you have multiple tools that are available that could actually do things like emulate the radio network, but there are tools also available which actually do things like emulate a user equipment, and doing that, it's possible to even sort of overwhelm the RAC network by probably sending a large number of MCs or stuff, right? And there are ways to do that. DDoS obviously is one of a favorite topic of mine, but then again, DDoS could actually be, as I said, from inside or outside, and they could actually be multiple. They could actually be in multiple flavors. You could be having volumetric device DDoSes. You could be having DDoSes which are application or slow DDoSes. You could actually have a blend of them, and it's extremely important to define where you actually provide those particular protections. I have slides up ahead which talk about where you actually do things like protection. Up ahead, obviously, you've got the standard packet core and you've got the standard slice leakage kind of functions. You've got, as I mentioned, when you talk about 5G, a lot of the communication basically is IP based. Pretty much all of it is IP based, and a lot of it actually runs over HTTP/HTTPS. Things like the exposure NEF function, basically, which exposes API over RESTful over the RESTful interface, right? So we need to make sure that those things are also protected. And last but not least, basically, is the roaming threats. And I have a separate section specifically on roaming threats because that's actually very important. Any questions here? Because I think this is something that this particular slide can actually pull in a lot of questions.
This is a heavy slide, Rajesh.
Yes, it is. This is probably the only slide that actually has a lot of text. And yeah, so I
no,
try to
I'm just
actually
looking at it,
everything.
I'm just allowing it to sink in. I'm sure questions will start flowing in, but I have one question. I mean, there are a couple of question, right? Okay, this is from James.
Hi, James.
Yeah, hi. He says, I mean, he has put two questions, and let me just read. I think you are coming to that because he's once asking about our telco cloud on their own. Is it a public? Are they create their own cloud? Or are they in public clouds like AWS, Azure, etc.?
That's a yes and a yes. It could be either their own or it could actually be public. I have some slides up there which talk about
okay,
what
because he's there talking about risk of virtualization. So risk of virtualization is there in private cloud as well, James.
Yes,
it's not only
yes.
in public cloud. I mean, public cloud you have a better chance of correcting the risk because they are being provided by players like Google, AWS, Azure, IBM, Microsoft, Microsoft. So they have their own standards. The moment you set up your private cloud, you are responsible for your own network security and your own cloud security. Then again, you will be forced to interact with public clouds because you can't get away from public clouds. That's why we are saying we all today live in the era of hybrid clouds, right? There's nothing private or public. It has to be hybrid cloud. I'm just venturing to answer that question from my side, Rajesh. Then the second question from him is, what is the scope probability of risk from these threats for the threats I think you are just showed of normal mobile users versus an enterprise? Will enterprise see a different threat? Will a mobile user consumer see a different threat? I think that's what James asked. And after this question, we will come back to the next questions a little later. But are these common threats for the user as well as enterprise, or some of them are just enterprise threats and some of them are specifically user threats?
So if you see towards the left is basically what I talked about, the end user or the UE test. And the UE could actually be an enterprise / a phone, right? Could be a mobile function. Most of the ones which are actually on the right are basically very specific to service providers, basically to the infrastructure itself. Now, are these relevant to the enterprise versus the mobile equipment? It really depends upon the equipment in concern, right? It also depends upon the security posture, the security thought process of that particular enterprise. Some enterprises actually have some very, very strong functions or strong capabilities or controls on their endpoints. For example, phones that are being actually controlled by MDMs, endpoint protection, right? So in that case, maybe there is a decent amount of protection at the endpoint itself for things like malware. If you're talking about the run-of-the-mill average user, an average user typically would be connecting to pretty much any network that he gets to, right? And in here, basically, it's not only about the equipment itself, it's also about the user himself, right? For example, I would typically never go to a site which basically shows, a broken lock, which basically is a certificate which is not valid or a certificate which is expired, right? I would typically look at that. Most guys won't, right? And now imagine this way, right? Imagine if I actually have somebody who's sort of masquerading a rogue node. He connects to I connect to his infrastructure, okay? And he's also spoofing my DNS. So what will actually happen is I go to google.com and I go to his google.com, not to my google.com, not to the actual google.com. Right? So those are kind of things that can actually be here. Other threads that could actually be relevant here, which are kind of a slightly more extended topic, is basically threads that are for the OT devices, right? IoT devices by themselves are notoriously insecure because there are no really standards out there. So the only protection mechanism that's actually there is probably the IP stack that's relevant out there. Now, the IP stack, if suppose if you actually have an enterprise that is having mechanisms to protect you via, let's say, DNS-based mechanisms, right? Maybe that particular protection could actually be that could protect the endpoint itself. But if you're talking about, let's say, a camera which is connected to, let's say, a home camera or a webcam, that may have no protection at all. So does that kind of attempt to answer your question? Because I know it's a pretty vast topic, because
It is.
enterprises typically would be looking at security in a very different eyeglass versus an end user. Most end users won't even think about it.
Yeah, but Rajesh, at the end of the day, people attack user to actually attack the enterprise, because hacking me
Yes,
is of minimal financial impact. Through me hacking my service provider is much better, right? I mean, that's what these organized crime rackets do.
yes.
Um,
The other thing also basically is, as if you remember, I talked about MC hacking, right?
yes.
So when I actually are, which I'm actually once I'm actually able to sort of get an MC or a list of MC, I'm actually able to track people. I'm able to understand where they are. I'm able to probably even intercept their messages. So using that particular kind of information, there's a lot of things I could do. I could do things like, well, the bad actor would do things like even maybe intercept his traffic, get into his social media, be able to sort of spread or basically push messages which kind of you know change the thought process of a demographic. Those things are also possible. So because the threat actors here are not only users, right? They're not only script kiddies, they're not only hackers or activists. I mean, they could actually be, if you remember, I talked about the fact that 5G is something that will probably change economies. When
Mhm.
something changes economies, you have to talk about things that could be, pretty good surface areas for cyber warfare. It could be espionage functions. It could be a lot of things.
Very, very sensitive topic we're getting into. Yes, it
I'm
is true.
sorry, but yeah,
Yeah, no,
there we are.
that's a reality. I mean, we are
Yes,
facing it, and that's a reality. And I know the bad actors are creating problems for nation states. So yes, Rajesh, now we will go ahead with the presentation, and at a next logical step, we'll stop for some questions.
perfect. So as I said, so if you see what I actually talked about basically was abuse by cloud service provider, which was kind of alluding to the question that James just talked about. A lot of service providers, specifically India, would typically be having their own cloud services or basically own backend, but that's not really the case everywhere, right? So I talked about the issues that could actually be in 4G, which could be things like session hijacking, fake access node, abuse of lawful interception. Those things could actually be very relevant in 5G, specifically when you're looking at an NSA kind of function. But there are new functions as well. There's a lot of SDN functions out here, a lot of SDN, because ultimately you're talking about a very, very large number of devices, and a large number of devices require automation. Automation requires software-defined mechanisms, right? You've got something called network virtualization bypassing. Okay, you've got things like rogue MEC gateways. A lot of it is, pretty much most of the communication here basically is based on API. So that is another problem here. That could actually be issues.
So would API
Uh,
security change in any way the way we understand API security today, and in the context of 5G?
uh, Most of the principles would actually remain similar, right? Making sure that the right authentication is done, making sure that you define APIs via gateways. In fact, there's something called an NEF, which is a network exposure function in 5G, which basically lets you do exactly that. It actually lets you expose your 5G capabilities to external functions.
Okay.
But I mean, it's like it's so the because think about this. So a lot of it is actually based on RESTful functions. So anything that is relevant to a RESTful API conversation could actually be based on. I mean, any security mechanism that is relevant to a RESTful communication would be relevant here as well.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So this is basically what I wanted to talk about from a surface perspective. Any questions here, or should I just go to the attack scenarios and the
Go
mitigation
ahead,
part of it?
Rajesh. I mean, yeah, go ahead. I think, please.
Perfect. All right. So as I mentioned, right, there are multiple areas and multiple threat functions that could actually be relevant here. I'll talk about some of them. Obviously, not all of them, because there's only so much time we can actually talk about, right? So I'll start with the perimeter, and the perimeter in this case obviously is the RAN, right? The radio area network, right, which is basically the G node Bs. So if you remember, I talked about the user equipment, which is the user. Okay, you've got the front hall, which basically goes into, well, different areas. So if you remember, I talked about the fact that your radio equipment here could actually be n number in nature, because the range of the radio equipment when you're talking about millimeter frequency is not that high. You've got high density, you don't actually have that much range, which means you might actually have multiple radios or multiple base units in different places, right? A lot of those base units might not necessarily be in very protected areas. right? So when they're not in very protected area and they're connecting to the infrastructure, we have to make sure that two things are protected. One, the infrastructure itself, connectivity to the infrastructure, and well, obviously the physical security is something we have to think about. But if you see the photo on the right, that's typically what a lot of external uh, boxes or basically wiring boxes look like, right? And if the number increases, you actually have, let's say, a small cell on top of a building, or hanging off, let's say, a traffic light. Those kind of things are more open in nature. So that's an area that we have to think about. So typically, what you'd be having in this particular thing, you'd probably be having the front wall, which has got the radio, which is connected to the infrastructure using a cell site router or maybe a switch, a top of rack switch, right? And there'll be a compute function. A compute function could actually be something that is actually sorry, hosting the video, which is a distributed unit, right, which basically controls the endpoint. So here you obviously have to think about capabilities that the product itself or the switch or the infrastructure itself gives you, things like port security, things like making sure the hardware is trusted so that the firmware is not compromised in certain ways. So things like trusted anchor functions would actually make sense. I may be talking about things that are, well, in certain cases Cisco specific, but again, pretty much most providers will probably give you these things via a different name, right? The other thing that'll make a lot of sense is authentication here, and we're talking about machine-to-machine authentication. So every port that actually is open in this particular place could actually be an area where somebody connects to the infrastructure and, well, attacks the infrastructure, right? So things like top of rack controls are extremely important here, right? Making sure that the video function itself doesn't get compromised, right? So you have to have controls over there from a imaging perspective as well. Any questions here, Rijat?
There is one question on the controls, and this is from Subraidu. Okay. He says, with these new threats emerging as a result of 5G, do you see controls required for info security undergoing a change with 5G rollout? So he's probably trying to compare the existing controls with any new controls which may emerge with respect to 5G, conceptually and technically, tactically.
Okay, I would assume definitely they would, as new use cases comes in, new kind of controls would actually come into the picture. The more important part basically is the fact that some of these particular controls will actually have to work on immutable functions, things like, basically more based on services rather than specific endpoints. So that is a yes. I'm sure things will actually evolve as things move. Sorry, what was the second part of the question? I missed that. I'm sorry about that.
No, is it going to be changed with 5G rollout? I think you answered that question. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as I mentioned, right, when you're talking about devices that are connecting to the infrastructure, you want to make sure that the port controls and the controls on the endpoint itself are protected. The other thing that you want to do is basically make sure that particular function is actually protected. And this kind of talks about, I think this slide will talk about what was actually asked a little while back about speed. So typically what you would want to do is basically you want to make sure there is IPsec between the DU/U/packet core. This is even more important if the service provider is actually using a public infrastructure, right? In cases where you've got leased lines and private infrastructure, maybe not. Okay, in a lot of cases, it will make a lot of sense. Now, you would actually have situations where the endpoint itself, or basically the DU itself, actually has capabilities for IPsec, but you might, in certain cases, not. And that's where the SPEC gateway comes into the picture, which is essentially a VPN concentrator, right? Obviously, I'll talk about zero trust up here, but zero trust is something that's extremely important as well. Now, the communication itself could actually be based via certificate as well, so that endpoints are authenticated to each other, authenticating with each other, right? There are multiple mechanisms when you're talking about authenticating on 5G. Okay, so I talked about AKI a little while back, but EPLS is also something that's very relevant to 5G. Any questions here?
No, none. Go ahead.
Okay. So moving up ahead, I talked about the initial part, which is basically the RAN part. I want to talk about the roaming part, and this is something that's extremely important, right? So I remember I talked about the fact that when people roam, when they actually move away from their home network to a different, for example, if I'm traveling from Bombay to Bangalore, I will probably connect to. So I have a Vodafone connection here. I might actually connect to maybe an Airtel connection out there, or something, right? So what typically happens is I would actually be latching on to the mobile network out there, and there would actually be a tunnel that's created, or basically a mechanism where I go and get tunnel back into my home network, right? And all the functions that actually go out, which actually will be basically going via my home network. All the connectivity will be via the home network. Now, the way it used to be done earlier is basically by something called SS7 originally, right? And SS7 kind of evolved, not evolved, basically, it kind of gave way to something called diameter slash GTP, which is GPRS tunneling inspection, right? And diameter obviously is an accounting slash authentication mechanism, right? Kind of very related to radius, but it is actually more towards the service provider side, right? And then you've got something called the PGW slash the SGW, which is basically the packet gateway, right? And so the SGW basically is what actually takes the communication between the radio slash the packet network, and the PGW obviously is the interface out there, right? So the threats obviously could be things like access to core functions, signaling vulnerabilities slash inadequate controls, right? And the things that could actually be done here obviously is things like fraud. And fraud is something that's extremely prevalent when you're talking about roaming threats. A large number here, right? Denial of service could actually be one more thing here. Now, when you talk about 3GPP, there is a particular function called SEPP, which is basically the security edge protection proxy. And what that does basically, it looks at authentication between the devices, mutual authentication functions. It looks at signaling traffic between operator and network, and make sure that there is no abuse out here. Now, one thing I do want to talk. Sorry, somebody raised their hand. But anyway, one thing I do want to talk about here is, if you remember, I talked about the IMSI, the SUPI slash SUKI, right? That also works over roaming scenarios. Now, that being said, this is only relevant when you have a 5G to 5G network, right? And not too many of those exist right now. And you remember I talked about the bugbear of backward compatibility? And that's basically where we are. So you actually have, when you're talking about a 5G core versus a 4G core, you still have the diameter slash the GTP inspection that comes into the picture, right? And there are multiple vulnerabilities in GTP slash multiple ways to exploit those, right? And that's basically where you need to have capabilities to have controls to protect them. And that's where a diameter slash a GTP firewall comes into the picture, right? What that does basically is authenticate these, looks at the communication that actually happens, and obviously authenticates the communication between them as well, so that the whole infrastructure is actually protected. Any somebody raised their hand, so is there a question?
Let me just look at that. 1 second. Any questions here? Okay, there's a general question which is from Somdev, which is about, what about Apple Car or advanced car with 5G? I think you did touch upon the connectivity part of it, but is there anything, especially with the connected cars coming in from different manufacturers? Any thoughts on that, Rajesh?
Yes. So as I mentioned, right, the connected car will actually have two functions, two use cases that are very relevant here. One is the ultra low latency part of things, right? And the second basically was the machine to machine communication, right? When you're talking about, let's say, connecting car, talking to other functions or maybe other connected car in the networks to make sure there aren't any crashes or hazard avoidance, right? And the other part obviously is the low latency part, and the low latency part is basically where the MEC part comes in the picture. So you would probably be having, or you would not probably, you'll actually definitely be having controls that are closer to the endpoint, right? Which basically provide you the compute capabilities. Other than that, would there be any specific security controls? I'm sure the operating system itself of the connected car, or the control system of the connected car itself, would obviously be having its own application level security. I don't necessarily think there would be something very specific, 5G specific, only for connected car itself, other than the specific use cases.
Got it. Got it. Thanks.
All right.
Yes.
At least I'm not that I'm aware of. But then, logically speaking, it's about connection, right? If you're talking about an endpoint connecting to an infrastructure, the security controls that are relevant to that particular infrastructure, that connectivity, are basically more about the connection itself, but not the application behind it. So in this case, the connected car is the application, right?
Yeah.
The connectivity is 5G. Does that make sense?
No, it's a very valid point. It's not about the connection. It is about that application, right? So especially in a connected car, what I understand, Rajesh, is there could be two levels of threat. The threat surface, one is a normal standard connection to any endpoint. And at the end of the day, connected car can be considered as an endpoint with application controls built in, right? It's not a very stoic endpoint like a point of sales equipment or a ATM counter, but it is more like a complicated application enabled endpoint.
That's right.
Okay, so it's a twin thing of the standard security controls coming in for any endpoint plus the application level security which is at the endpoint. In this case, it's a connected car. It could be, for example, a health equipment. It could be a pacemaker for that matter, right?
Yes, I mean that's basically where the conversation of defense in depth comes into the picture, right? Secure at every level you can.
You mentioned zero trust as well earlier.
Yes.
Yes, Rajesh, go ahead, please.
All right. So, in case somebody's actually interested, these slides, obviously this particular thing will be available earlier. So these are the different functions that are actually available when you're talking about, these are specific control points that come in, or the interface points that come in when you're talking about roaming, right? So usually you'd want to actually have a firewall at any roaming partner function. And the authentication obviously has to be done both ways because each has to protect from the other. Right. So we've talked about the perimeter, we've talked about roaming, we've talked about the edge. Let's just talk about DDoS here. And DDoS is extremely important because, again, as I said, a lot of the attacks that actually come in, it's quite easy to sort of initiate a DDoS attack, right? Because you've got a large number of devices. If those devices are insecure, if they actually are controlled by bots, and you can initiate an attack from inside. Since the threat surface is so spread out, it's not only at the internet edge, because an internet could be anywhere. A perimeter could be anywhere, depending upon what the MEC, what kind of capability, what kind of application the MEC is providing. So DDoS is something that's extremely relevant, right? And I'll talk about different mitigation mechanisms for DDoS. I'll talk about where you want to actually keep them, right? Which could actually be intrinsic as well as external functions, right? So as I said, DDoS could be from inside to outside, or it could be outside to inside, right? You could be having compromised endpoints that are actually initiating attacks to the packet core itself or to the MEC itself. And obviously slicing is something that will help out, making sure that you actually have the right infrastructure access functions, so that endpoints are not actually able to access the core is something that's extremely important, right? And these are things that are actually it might sound very, very obvious, but these are things that can cause issues because of misconfigurations, because of the fact that, well, nobody thought about it. Nobody thought about trying to put an access list at the edge, which doesn't give access to the infrastructure. Right, so those are things that are extremely important, right? DDoS attacks, as I said, could be from inside to outside, and it could actually be also you as a service provider and all your devices basically being all your OT devices getting compromised and initiating an attack outside, as has been seen with the Mirai attacks, right? So again, could be an attack to the DU/G, because ultimately these are all compute units. You have to make sure that they are not compromised. And in this particular case, a denial of service could actually also not only be an IP-based function, it could also be a radio-based function. So you need to actually make sure that you've got the right radio protection mechanisms also out here, or the right isolation functions, so that particular attack can be segmented within the infrastructure. Right. So again, you've got the MEC-based attacks or attacks to the MEC, right, to the packet core, right? So first thing that you want to do is basically make sure you have the isolation, and isolation is extremely important, and it's actually something that can be done quite logically in a 5G infrastructure, because of the fact that slicing is something that's intrinsic to the function, right? So you've got different use cases like the packet core, you've got the IoT packet core, you've got the gaming packet core. You could be having a situation where, let's say, a particular attack is only attack, or basically only affecting one versus the rest of them. Obviously, you have to take care of the fact that you don't want to do interslice leakage, and I'll talk about that up ahead as well, right? So slicing / segmentation is the first thing that you want to do, so that isolation actually happens, right? The second thing you want to do basically is make sure that the control functions are separated from the user functions. Remember I talked about cups earlier? You want to make sure that you actually make isolation there as well. Because if let's say a particular user slice is actually compromised, that particular user slice is compromised. If you actually have a signaling slice or a major control function that is compromised, you could end up sort of losing the whole thing, right? That's one part. The other part that you have to remember that most of the stuff actually, a lot of places, a lot of texts talk about the fact that you should be doing these things on dedicated hardware, but that usually is not the situation. A lot of these things could be containers in the same infrastructure. So you need to make sure that the capabilities of whatever virtualization mechanism, whether using a container-based function, or if you're actually using a virtual machine-based function, you have the right amount of controls between them, right? So the second part that I want to talk about is throttling, and throttling is as simple as that, right? Throttling is basically being able to sort of reduce or define thresholds on what is allowed, what is the throughput allowed, and stopping it out there. But the most logical place to actually put in throttling would be the CU here, which is the central unit, because as I said, it is basically the aggregator for a lot of views, right? And it actually has a lot of visibility. So typically what would actually happen is you may be able to sort of put in sensors on different areas, which could be seeing if there's a particular thread that's actually happening or a particular DDoS that's actually happening. And you could probably send a signal out to the CU. The signal could be something like, let's say, a BGP flow spec kind of function that is actually doing a throttling, saying that I want to only allow this particular amount of traffic, or I want to block this particular, or reduce or change the DSCP value of some particular thing so that the rest of the network can actually control it. So throttling is another function that is extremely important, right? Control it at the CU and you'll be able to do a lot of things out here. There are feeds, there are mechanisms basically so that the CU can, or logically speaking, depending upon the vendor of the CU, they would be able to take signals to actually define these throttling mechanisms. It could be as simple as a rate limit. It could be as complicated as a flow spec based function. Any questions here?
Just one second. Let me just say whether you. Okay. Let me see. What are the ones? Okay. There's a question from Ranjit Nair. Yeah. Does protection services from ISPs, namely Arbor, really help against DDoS? What if the attackers using heavy bandwidth or more, say 100 CB or more for attacks on the infrastructure? Do 5G networks have any added protection that earlier technology lacks?
Okay, so I do have a section specifically on the third-party DDoS protection.
Okay.
I think the next couple of slides I can take that.
So Ranjit, just hang on. Rajesh is getting there. Thank you.
Yes. So again, before I even get into where you want to place the DDoS protection mechanism, typically here's how it is, right? When you're talking about volumetric DDoS, you just talked about the 300 GB kind of function, right? You've got the DDoS itself, and you actually have got the valid traffic. The way typically what would actually happen is if there's a DDoS that's actually happening, you would want to sort of redirect that traffic into a clearing station, right? And that clearing station could be local or it could actually be external, depending. And DDoS design or DDoS protection design is a different topic altogether. But typically, you'd be having areas where you actually sense, and those sensing mechanisms could usually be based on telemetry functions, things like net flow, right, or IPFix, where you would actually understand what is normal versus what's not, right? Deviations in those particular trending could define if there's a DDoS that's actually happening. When that actually happens, usually what happens is something that is upstream. The signal goes to something that's upstream, that is bigger than that particular pipe that's being choked. Because you can't see, there's no sense trying to stop a pipe that is overflowing from the other side of it. You actually have to put a throttle somewhere before the particular attack comes in, right? So the detection function usually is on the actual business part of things. The throttle function is usually somewhere outside or a dedicated DDoS scrubbing center, which could be cloud-based or which could be local as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does. Let me see. Okay. I guess so. So Ranjit, I think it's answered. In case you have any further questions, you can put it up on the question answer window. We will also have session open once Rajesh finishes his deck, that we will still have a few minutes open for question answers. So please keep your questions ready so that we can answer as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay, so moving up ahead, right? We talked about where the DDoS function should be, right? So obviously you've got the mid-haul slash backhaul. They need to actually have protection mechanisms, right? So uh, this was the question, right? Where does the DDoS controller come to the picture? And typically the DDoS controller here is something that actually takes in signals. So usually you'd actually have the switching infrastructure, probably specific control points here that will be monitoring and sending your network information to the DDoS controller. The DDoS control basically is what will send out signals to the mitigation function. The mitigation function could actually be, as I said, a flow spec thing to a core router which says, please drop this or please throttle this. Or it could actually be in certain cases, in earlier DDoS functions, what will actually happen is instead of a flow spec, you would basically get a more specific route. For example, if you have, let's say, a /24 network that's being attacked, 2/25 routes will be given so the traffic passes through it, right? Other thing that we want to talk about here basically is the two kinds of DDoSes, right? So volumetric DDoSes typically are something that are detected pretty well via telemetry mechanisms. When you're talking about application-based DDoSes, those typically require inline kind of function. So you may have a situation where you might actually have the overall traffic cleaned out by the volumetric and then re-injected into something that's inline to see if there is any application level DDoS that's coming in. There was a hand up by James.
We haven't seen any questions. So as we see
Okay.
questions, we will go ahead.
All right. I'm sorry. I don't see the question because I'm actually on full screen mode. So.
No, don't worry. I mean, if questions one come, I'll take it. But don't want to disturb the flow. It's very interesting. So we will reserve the questions towards end of the session now, Rajesh.
Perfect. All right. So moving up ahead, what if those guys are already in, right? And this is basically I want to talk about the virtualization part itself, right? And so and this kind of will kind of answer some of the questions that were asked earlier, right? So you have the multiple containers that are running different functions, right? The issues that could actually be here basically are things like kernel escape, things like lateral movement, access management, could be things like resource exhaustion, right? So these are all, well, containerization as well as it can actually be a virtual machine function. So kernel obviously not, because usually you have dedicated kernels for standard virtual machines. So what would kernel escape mean? So you've got you've got a host, okay, you've got 3 containers running on it, right? And those 3 containers obviously share a common kernel. So if a particular container is compromised and he's actually able to get to the kernel itself, he would probably be able to compromise the other guys as well, right? And this is something that's extremely important for you to protect, because the other thing that you have to remember that in a lot of container environments, the internal IP addresses could actually be just a single. I mean, could be a single IP address, and could be and I have a slide up on that as well. So this is something that's extremely important, right? So protecting kernel escape could be done by mechanisms like pod security policy, depending on what your container control mechanisms. Like in Kubernetes, you've got something called pod security policies, which could actually protect communication between one to another. So in case one particular container is compromised, it stays compromised. It doesn't really compromise the others, right? This could also define the resources that are available for it. So the resource exhaustion part could also be something that could be controlled. See, one big problem with not controlling or not defining resource limitations is if you have multiple workloads running on a single infrastructure, it is possible that one particular workload can actually exhaust the rest of it because there's no real control or no real limits defined there. So this is something that you want to do as well, right? The other part that I want to talk about, which I just mentioned a little while back, is lateral movement. So when you're talking about Kubernetes cluster, right, you obviously have an outbound connectivity connection, basically, which is something that is that basically is providing an interface to the world. But there could be a lot of internal within a cluster. There could actually be a lot of internal communication. That internal communication itself might actually just have one IP address, right? So if you have one device, one particular controller, one particular container being compromised, it could very easily spread to the others. I'm not necessarily talking about kernel escape here. I'm talking about network level escape out here, right? And this is basically where you want to do things like network namespace isolation within the Kubernetes cluster, so that that particular thread stays within that particular thread. I'm sure that the last session that was done on containers explains this in a much better than I did. I just want to make sure you're aware of this particular thread. Okay. Moving up ahead, we have to talk about protecting the packet core. And this is where strategy comes into the picture quite a bit, right? So there are multiple components here, basically, when you're talking about the core, right? Multiple use cases, multiple functions, right? And typically, a lot of, the 3GPP security enhancement I talked about, they actually do use TLS, and they do use OpenAuth to make sure that those things are actually protected. And there is actually a really good, if you see the link out here, there's a really good document on defining what the trust model should be actually when you're talking about 3GPP. And I would actually urge you to have a look at that. That's a very long discussion. But it talks about basically making sure that your crown jewels are right at the end, right at the middle, and different levels of security are defined beyond it. Trust model is something that we've always talked about, right? So any questions as yet?
Let me check. There is a question on compliance, which we can take a little later,
Okay.
because I did see that. So Somdeep, we will come back to your questions. We are not ignoring your question. We are coming back to you.
Perfect. All right. So moving up ahead, what do we recommend here, right? So obviously we have to make sure that you actually have the right level of slicing. So you talk about the low latency functions. You want to talk about the ultra high broadband. You want to talk about the machine. Make sure that all of them actually are separate slices. Make sure that they don't interfere with each other, right? Make sure that the devices itself are being hardened. I mean, if there are mechanisms to harden at the device level itself, or if there are controls that basically protect you at the connect level, make sure that you do that. Make sure that the images that you use, or basically the catalog pulls that you do, are from verified, certified sources. Make sure that the endpoints itself are not, vulnerable to fake operating systems. So trust points and trust anchors are extremely important out here. Make sure that configurations that you actually send to the endpoints are verified. Make sure that you actually have the right amount of authorization slash authentication, and obviously accounting functions, right? As I said, identity and access is extremely important. Make sure that so when you're talking about availability, you have to make sure that the standard accounting functions, the faults, those kind of things are also taken care of, right? Make sure that you log things correctly, because you need to have a trail when you're trying to see if there's an issue out here, right? Everything should be logging to, which kind of gets you to the next part, right? Make sure that you actually have the right SOC policies, the right monitoring policies to have the right visibility, because if you don't see something, you don't protect against it. Visibility is extremely important. Visibility could come in multiple factors. It could be basically based on controls that you install. It could be based on telemetry. It could be based on things like behavior anomaly detection functions. I mean, there are a lot of technologies available. A lot of them actually use things like packet capture. A lot of them do things like use telemetry. Some of them use a combination of two. Some of them actually use packet capture to glean application functions as well, or application information as well. Make sure that you use them in the right locations, right? And you make sure that you actually have a proper vulnerability management function. If you actually have a CI/CD, because if as I told you, it's actually going to be a service-based architecture. Make sure that your CI/CD cycle is as controlled as possible. There's a lot of make sures here, but then again, that's it. And the important part here again is there's going to be hundreds of, if not hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of devices in infrastructure, which means that making sure that automation is part of your strategy is extremely important. And automation it actually has to be from the get-go. When you do deploy a device in the infrastructure, it should be able to sort of authenticate itself. It should be able to get the right configuration, the right, as a lot of service providers call it, an MBSS, or a minimum baseline, is something that needs to be provided to make sure that those particular the pathways for those particular configurations and the repositories for them are not compromised, right? So bake in zero trust security end to end. That's basically the recommendation here. And zero trust could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And to be honest, zero trust has been there for a while. I mean, it's been more defined since a while, but a lot of people actually have been doing that. Make sure that anything that connects to in most simple terms, anything that connects to your infrastructure has to be authenticated and authorized, and it has to be defined what role it plays. And you have to define what role it plays in your infrastructure. If it is allowed access to something, that's the only thing needs to be allowed access to. And this is something that needs to be done continuously. It cannot be just connect to the network and I have access for the rest of my tenure in the infrastructure. Does that make sense? And this is essentially security common sense, right? You will apply these kind of things to pretty much everything that you actually do. From an enterprise perspective, I would, and from an enterprise perspective, I would actually recommend to make sure that you have the right standard security functions. I mean, make sure that when you're connecting to your infrastructure, that particular path is encrypted. Make sure that you have endpoint protection via a proper EDR. Make sure that you actually have connectivity protection via DNS if you can, right? Protect it like you protect your end devices like you would connect anywhere. That's basically the important part. The main thing that 5G gives you basically is an expanded threat surface. It gives you much higher speed connectivity, right? That's something you have to think about. Questions here? I mean, I'm kind of done with my slides and I'm kind of pretty much close to the
Of course, there are enough questions, and let me catch up with the questions. And Rajesh, let me tell you, this has been a very enlightening session for us. Because we have been hearing about 5G, and even today in the newspapers, 5G things have come all over the place. All the vendors, and I want to ask you, and while you speak, you also, work for Cisco, right? So before I start, let me ask this question. So how is a vendor like Cisco or any of the other network vendors, who are in the security as well as in network, readying themselves for supporting the 5G rollout for the telcos, just generally?
Okay, so I can speak for Cisco, right? So we obviously have a very, very strong. So I mean, we've actually been part of the 5G movement quite a bit. We've got a very strong product lines which actually support the 5G infrastructure, be it from a cell site router function to from a security perspective, I did talk about a lot of functions that we mentioned a little while back, things like network behavior anomaly detection, things like endpoint protection, things like DDoS protection in certain cases, capabilities on the endpoints itself to make sure that the infrastructure is protected. Now that's basically the product side of it. And there are obviously some products that are very, very 5G specific, some of which I'm not really an expert on, so I really can't talk about them. But what I can definitely talk about basically is that we do have a very strong consulting arm on 5G itself. We worked on some of the largest 5G rollouts or 5G rollouts in the world, right? And there's a lot of knowledge that we're actually gaining, a lot of learning that we have, and we're happy to provide that as an engagement to any customer or any service provider that would be interested.
Okay, so let me just go for a couple of questions, Rajesh. I think yes, the answer is yes. We will be sharing this PPT later at the Saka site. We will do that. You have touched, and there is an earlier question from Javed, but I didn't come to that because you touched that on SUSI and SUPI. How do SUSI and SUPI help in security? I know that you spent quite some time on that. Is there any other points you might want to share for that Javed question? It was an earlier question, so
so one thing I do want to talk about SUPI and SUKI is these are basically optional parameters, optional by the 3GPP forum. So it may or may not actually get implemented, really depend upon how it is. So the standard itself actually talks about implementing it, as in it should be there. It doesn't necessarily talk about how it's going to be implemented. Logically speaking, there would actually be a public certificate on the phone. That's basically how things would be encrypted. But there isn't really any mechanism or anything that really talks about how the key rotation actually happens. So we'll probably have to wait and see how that actually goes, how much it is adopted by. Because typically what happens in a lot of situations, if something is optional, it is not necessarily adopted. And this is my thought process. Obviously, it may time may prove me wrong. Hopefully,
I do understand. There are a couple of questions from Ajil Thomas, a gentleman by name Ajil Thomas. Yeah. So his question is, primarily from let me put both the questions together. He first asked what to monitor. I'm sure he would have seen that what to monitor from the threat surface that you have actually demonstrated, and are the data centers, building up specific use cases for allowing this expansion? Because I'm sure the data center is going to get loaded once the 5G gets rolled out, right? It could be third-party data centers, it could be the data centers of the telco providers themselves.
So that's basically where the concept of distributed computing comes into the picture, right?
Yep.
Distributed MEC comes into the picture. We're not talking about, let's say, a data center or a centralized data center providing everything. We're talking about a centralized data center probably providing, the control functions. We're talking about the applications itself actually moving towards the edge, and those particular data centers, those particular applications could be dedicated data centers, or these. Sorry. Yeah, they could be dedicated data centers, or they could actually be, container, mini micro data centers that are actually providing very specific functions. So that's so are the data center providers, increasing their capacity of 5G? Honestly, I'm not in a position to answer that right now, but logically speaking, the overall amount of compute that's going to be used for 5G applications, when I'm talking about a sum total, it'll be much more than what it is right now. Whether it'll be concentrated on one data center or two data centers, or let's say thousands of data centers, that's basically more of the question.
And how are the managed service providers, just as an extension, gearing up for this, Rajesh? I know you look at both of them, many of them on your day job.
So how I manage, that's a nice question, and honestly I don't know if I have an answer here, because I mean, managed service, could you actually sort of specify which specific kind of managed service are we talking about?
Yeah, so for example, most of these telco providers, right, they have outsourced part of their security to large organizations. It could be, they're like blue chip organizations who are actually taking over. It could be multinationals, Indian multinationals, who actually have taken over the strategic outsourcing of these telcos. Mm-hmm. And how are they gearing up for this 5G? Because it's a collaborative effort there, right?
So, to be honest, I don't have a completely straight answer for this, because as I said, 5G is something that's still being worked upon within the country, right? As of right now, the only deployments or the only testing that's been done are not even the testing. The only demonstration that's actually been done is actually the option 3, which on the back end is pretty much 4G. Right? 5G, we don't have a pure 5G network here at the moment. Once that comes in, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that will be geared up. I'm sure people are already gearing up for it. Again, I'm not necessarily privy to a lot of that at the moment.
Okay. Now let me come to further questions. I think we can take a few questions, and there is a question about Cisco. I think you can talk to Rajesh separately, because in ISACA we don't take vendor specific questions. So I would leave that, Girish. You will apologize, and you'll understand that. What about IT compliance other than security compliance for those 5G companies? So is there a difference between IT compliance and security compliance? For example, are they looking something for the network part of it, or IT part of it, and OT part of it separately?
So the connotations of security in an OT environment versus an IT environment, and again, when I'm talking about OT, I'm talking about operational technology. I'm talking about things like plants / utilities. That particular thought process is very different, right? If you see a lot of the earlier OT environments basically are hybrids, right? A lot of the equipment itself is legacy in nature, and they are kind of, it's more of a dongle approach that actually happens, right? So yes, there is definitely a difference between the compliance. Some of these compliance would actually be more based on internal rule sets rather than something that's regulated by the government, right? That's all I can say. I'm not really a compliance expert, to be honest, but then this is the way I would actually think about it.
I get it. Yeah. Because this is a very relevant question from the ISACA point of view, because it's a primary in IT. It's an audit organization, right? So audit and controls. So
apologies for this.
No, perfectly fine. I mean, this is fine. So this is a question for us. Yes, there is going to be, there are going to be some changes in the compliance architecture. NIST has already come out with guidelines. The ISO IEC is coming out with certain guidelines. There are standardized organizations which are coming out with these guidelines. And those guidelines are still in infancy, because, as I said, there are only a couple of countries. And I was in South Korea, before the pandemic some time back, and I know that South Korea actually was one of the first countries which launched 5G. You might see that even countries like Japan are not on 5G yet, right? Totally, right? US is not on 5G. We are only auctioning the spectrum in India. So all of us, and I think when the mass rollout happens is when these standards will become firmed up. So kind of, watch the space. I think standards will emerge because the initial standards are already put up by the leading standards organization. They are still in infancy. They're evolving. A lot of articles you can find on that. But I think the rollout actually will tell us what standards need to be, modified to suit the actual rollouts. Because today it is limited to certain sectors. We are still about connected cars. We haven't seen a connected car yet in Asia big time, right? I mean, they're all opening out, but it's still in the testing phases. So I think we'll have to wait for a few things to emerge for the actual standards. There is a question from that's Somdev. There is a question from Girish. Are there specific use cases of network isolation and kernel isolation?
Are there specific use cases not based on 5G? So the network isolation itself basically is where the slicing comes into the picture, right? Slicing can actually be implemented in different ways depending upon how it comes in. I mean, the specification is basically the need for slicing. Now, a lot of vendors will be doing it in their own ways. So kernel isolation, as I mentioned earlier, right? For example, Kubernetes could actually be having a different mechanism to do it, right? Versus if you're trying to do things like, let's say, on a virtual machine, a VMware could probably be doing it in a different way.
Got it. Now there are two questions. I'm going to club them up because one is from Ajil and the other one is from Subaraidu. There were similar questions. The question here is, who is accountable? As consumers of telecom services, what should we be looking out for from the service providers to ensure services provided to us are secure? So this is the same question like, when I go on and take a cloud service provider service, is the cloud service provider guaranteeing my security, or am I supposed to take care of something else? I mean, I know the answer, but I'll pass it on to you. And Ajil Thomas has the same question. We have IoT devices. Who would be accountable? Service provider, device provider, or consumer, right? It's an interesting question, but the answer is, yeah, it's very evident, but I'll let Rajesh answer that.
All right. So here's how it is, right? The service provider is responsible for protection of its own infrastructure. That's one thing, that's primary, right? So if you actually have a situation where, let's say, the service provider is compromised and is not able to provide services, so that's obviously a problem that the service provider has to take care of. If you actually have endpoints that are compromised because of vulnerabilities of the endpoint itself, right? Nothing to do with the infrastructure / the connectivity itself, then it's typically the end user that is actually he's the guy who's actually responsible. It's exactly what Mr. Wiley said a while back, right? From a cloud service provider, depending on what you're taking. If you're taking a SaaS service, then the security of that particular SaaS function is the function of the provider. If you're taking infrastructure as a service, then the application that you're running in, right? The security of that is your responsibility. It's not the service provider's responsibility. The service provider is just giving you a connection, just giving you the infrastructure. Does that kind of resonate with what you were thinking, Vaidi?
Absolutely. It is like, I mean, make it very simple, right? I mean, is bank supposed to be safeguarding my transaction, or am I equally responsible for safeguarding my transaction? The answer is both, right? I mean, I will not do a banking with a bank where I think the security is slack. At the same time, I can't blame the bank that if I'm misplacing my card, or if I misuse the password, or I don't follow the MFA route, and I don't take care of myself, then so there is an equal responsibility. So I think the onus on consumers or the users are equally there with respect to the cloud service providers. And it's a $1 million question, right? I mean, a lot of enterprises today are trying to shift the onus to a cloud service provider, be it any of the large service providers who are actually providing cloud services. But there is a law which limits the liability of the cloud service providers with respect to, and as well as you, and the laws are also different from countries to countries, right? From geographies to geographies. So it's a very, very tough situation to actually dealing. So I would think the responsibility is equal, because at the end of the day, what you lose is your data and your security and your business. So there are cyber insurance policies which are coming up from leading insurance providers, which takes care of any aspect of the cyber security. Here, something which is to be very, very important is enterprises. I'm not talking about individual users, but if there are corporate enterprises which are users, B2B, and there are telco service providers, there should be continuous exercises on how to be prepared for a cyber incident. How much ever we do, these incidents are going to happen. And in 5G, the threat surface, all of us have seen, have expanded so much. And the threat intelligence platforms that we are having, right? Cisco has a platform, IBM has a platform, other McAfee has a platform. A lot of guys has threat platform, open platforms are there. We have to collect these details, and the threat surface has expanded so much, which means we should be aware of how to respond to a threat. The threat is going to come in. Definitely the event will transfer to an incident. So how do you train yourself? How do you get yourself experience to manage a cyber incident? And when you manage a cyber incident, is your corporate team ready to manage a cyber incident? Cyber incident is a business issue more than a technical issue. So it's not limited to your security or a SOC team. It goes to a board of directors. How do you communicate to the outside world? How do you manage your stock prices during a cyber incident? How do you communicate to your employees? How do you communicate to your suppliers? How do you communicate to your other stakeholders, right? So it's very important. So the responsibility is across. The responsibility is with the provider. The responsibility is with the user. The user could be an individual. The user could be an enterprise. Long answer to a short question. So I guess, we are here. Further questions you can actually, there are not many, but we would be able to, there are some questions about patching. Patching is important. It is as important as how you do patching on your endpoint device. Patching is important for any software, and especially control systems are weak, as Rajesh mentioned earlier, on the software patching and software, what do you call that, the sternness, right? The control systems use still the old age software without update. And that's why you see nuclear reactors getting hacked. You saw the Florida water system getting hacked, right? And it was it could have been very fatal, but for the authorities stopping it at the right time, finding and stopping up. This happened like 2 days back, last week. And 2 days back, the French president has come out putting up a standard for the healthcare systems, where there are a lot of hacks, ransomware threats are happening on the healthcare equipments, especially in the pandemic scenario. And these healthcare systems are nothing but OT devices, IoT devices, though they are not on 5G. So the more they are on 5G, the threat surface is going to expand more. Just with that, I would like to, say that it has been a wonderful session, Rajesh. We are not done yet. I want to invite our executive committee member, Mr. Ganesh Ramani here. We have a feedback.
Vaidi, I have a question on the health aspect. On that, we heard that 5G on the health aspect during the pandemic spreading during the last 2019. So, what is the health impact for the 5G, Rajesh?
That's a loaded question. I mean, there was a conversation happening basically where we were talking about, 5G is responsible for, for COVID spread. I'm not really qualified to answer that, but I would not necessarily believe that.
Yeah, the threat actually is, there are two ways of threats, right? One is, actually there are multiple threats using COVID. One is using simple like phishing emails to target the COVID patients or possible infected people, promising them money and getting, standard thing of, man in the middle attack and getting the money out, or even fooling the government and companies for taking the money out, right? That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is more serious, stealing IP of the vaccines. That's a nation state activity, as we could see, which is very dangerous. That's what the French president came out with. That's what Australian prime minister came out with. We are aware of that. The third one is creating panic in the public, right? spread false news about the vaccine. So, and make it appear as if it is coming from authentic sources. And that's a serious issue, right? Spread undue pandemic. So people are, unfortunately, the criminal's mind is also criminal. So they are, they do spread about this. So there is also hack of, the fourth one is hack of system to collect the identities of the patients. That has been happening rampant. Attempts have been happening. I don't know how much they have been successful, but attempts of that, taking data out, because COVID has opened out Pandora's boxes. There are apps which are available there. People are getting interactive. So more people opened out as threat surface opens out, right? So there are targets. So targets in 4 different ways. The health sector is now very, very aware of the need of cybersecurity policies. Over to Mr. Ganeshan. There is a feedback form on your screen. You can click, you can scan the QR code. You will be able to give the feedback to us. Or you can, if you're not able to scan this QR code, you can go to www.menti.com, put the code there, 1464826, and punch in the feedback. So we'll give you a few minutes. We would request all the participants to make sure that you give your feedback to us. All right. Thank you. I invite Mr. Raj, who is our Vice President, for vote of thanks. Mr. Raj.
Thank you, Vaidi. A big thanks to Rajesh from the ISACA Bangalore chapter for taking time out of your busy schedule and giving a fantastic session on 5G and related security. The topic was very much relevant with the 5G hype building in India. The next generation smartphone set to drive demand. So I have read that Airtel has announced that next year 5G is ready, while Jio is going to roll out by 5G service in second half of 2021. But our parliament is yet to be ready for 5G action in coming months. And the tech companies also doing a 5G label and putting a lot of product into the market. I recently bought a 5G enabled phone as well. So last but not the least, I want to thank you all members who are attend this session, and I hope you have some essential takeaway from this session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Rajesh. Thank you. The session ends. Really appreciate all participation. Thank you very much.